With Attack on Titan's final season, Part 3, Part 1, airing a couple days ago, the talk around Attack on Titan is as heightened as it's been in months, if not years. However, the problem with having the final season broken up into what is essentially 5 parts is that it leads to a lot of confusion. Because believe it or not, it's very hard to keep all of the knowledge of a very complicated anime universe in your brain when you only get a new episode every 6 months. But fortunately, that leaves a lot of room for people like me. People who have deleted things in their minds like social skills or proper manners and etiquette in order to make more room for anime knowledge. And one of the things that I see a lot of people confused about when talking about Attack on Titan is Attack on Titan's very complicated history. See, now that the rumbling is underway and Eren is trying to kill the entire world outside of Paradise Island, I see a lot of people confused as to how the rumbling came to be. Almost every single Attack on Titan enjoyer understands the fact that the Marleyans and the Eldians don't get along. And most Attack on Titan enjoyers go one step beyond that and understand that within the confines of Marley, Eldians live as a suppressed ethnicity, much akin to Jews in World War II Germany. And while how we got to this point has been explained a couple of times in Attack on Titan, it was explained quickly and very long ago. So today I want to break down the rather complicated and not so pretty history between Eldia and Marley, all with the hopes of answering the question, why did Eren start the rumbling? I'd like to say that this video will not revolve around me discussing the morals of the rumbling. I've already made a video very much explaining how I feel about the rumbling called Is Eren Correct? Today I'm simply going to answer the question, why did the rumbling start? So sit back, relax, and get your notebook out because today we're in history class, but history of Attack on Titan. Before we get to diving into this 20 minutes of anime social studies, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, hit that noti bell. And if you love hearing me talk about Attack on Titan, then you're gonna love my new podcast that I'm doing with Danny Mana, where me and Danny break down everything that happened in anime this week, Attack on Titan very much included. In fact, we just released a brand new episode this Sunday, breaking down our feelings on the newest episode. So Eldia and Marley, their history goes substantially further back than what we've seen in the anime. For thousands of years, these two nations have either coexisted, suppressed each other, or tried to forget each other exist. Though it's usually the suppressing each other bit. You see, Eldia, the nation that currently exists on Paradise Island, which fun fact is actually just Madagascar. The Attack on Titan map is actually just the world map flipped upside down, which technically you can't do because any orientation of looking at the map is correct because the Earth is a globe. It's just that the first globes were created in the Northern Hemisphere and were also Eurocentric. So they wanted Europe to be on top of the globe instead of on bottom. And that was real social studies in the anime social studies lesson. But Eldia didn't always exist on the island of Paradise. For hundreds of years, the kingdom of Eldia existed on the mainland, which would be like Mozambique or Zimbabwe. However, roughly a century prior to the events of Attack on Titan, the LDN Empire fell apart due to internal conflict and therefore had to flee to Paradise Island. And upon reaching Paradise Island, King Fritz created all of the walls that kept the Eldians in. He then used the memory manipulation powers of the founding Titan to make all of the Eldians on the island believe that they had always been there. But how did we get here? How did the Eldian kingdom look like at the peak of its power? Were the Eldians always in a place of power? Well, in order to tell this story, we're gonna have to start this video off in the way that we tend to start these kind of videos off. At the beginning. The earliest known events in the Attack on Titan universe happened about 2,000 years before the events of Attack on Titan. At this point, Eldia was a primitive tribe, not a kingdom or an empire, kind of just a loose grouping of people. However, considering the fact that this was 2,000 years ago, that wasn't substandard. The Eldians, while existing as this primitive tribe, were very aggressive. They would raid other tribes and villages to take their men and women as slaves. And as the Eldians continually raided other villages and tribes, they got larger and larger as time progressed. And the Eldians were not like Einar and Thorfinn's owner in Vinland Saga. They were incredibly cruel to their slaves. Any man or woman upon being enslaved by the Eldians would have their tongue cut out, as the Eldians treated their slaves much in the same way as they would treat livestock, and they wouldn't ask for an opinion from livestock. However, this isn't the only thing the Eldians took from their slaves. If a slave was ever disobedient towards their master, the Eldians would gouge out their eyeballs, as they made the assumption that a blind and mute slave would never have the occasion to be disobedient ever again. And it was around this time, 2,000 years ago, when a girl named Ymir came into the ownership of the Eldians. See, Ymir, as we know her, is the founding Titan. However, Ymir wasn't always the founding Titan. You see, Ymir worked as a slave under the Eldians for a matter of years, until one day some slaves lost some pigs. And considering the fact that the Eldians were a primitive tribe, losing any amount of pigs is devastating. And thus the Eldians looked for somebody to blame, somebody to kill for this grave injustice. And it's at this point that all of the slaves held by the Eldians pointed at Ymir in blame. But considering the fact that it was Ymir who let the pigs out of the pen in order to save them, they were, to some degree, just sort of telling the truth. Though snitches do get stitches. Or world-altering Titan shifting abilities. Really could go either way. It's at this point that the tribe leader of the Eldians, simply known as Fritz, decided to release Ymir to be hunted down as wild sport. And as Ymir ran through the woods wounded and confused, she fell at the base of an unusually large tree. And as she tried to climb under this tree, she fell into a sinkhole filled with liquid. And within this liquid resided a spine-like creature, a creature that looked akin to a centipede. This creature, upon coming into contact with Ymir, fused with her, making Ymir the first ever Titan. Now, this creature is actually based off a real-life animal from the Cambria period called the Hallucigenia. The Hallucigenia was a spine-like worm that existed at the bottom of the ocean around 500 million years ago. As to why it was chosen, I don't know, it looks cool. Ymir, after doing the first ever Titan transformation, then rampaged around as a Titan for a little bit until eventually she tuckered herself out and changed back into, well, Ymir. It was at this point that the Eldians went from a primal tribe to a proper kingdom. See, the powers of Titan shifters in the present in the Attack on Titan universe are still terrifying. With simply the power of a couple thousand colossal titans, Eren has managed to pull off the Rumbling, which is a force of nature that the entire world's combined military forces most likely wouldn't be able to battle against. Now imagine that power, but 2,000 years ago. No OEM gear, no guns, just swords, bows, and horses. Fritz used the immense power of this Titan to cultivate land, to build bridges, and more importantly than anything, amass wealth and destroy his enemies. Eldia's biggest and baddest enemy were Marley. And thus, 2,000 years ago is when the complicated history between Marley and Eldia begins, as Fritz, with the power of Ymir, crushed Marley and enslaved them. Fritz, as a way to reward Ymir for the years of work she had done for him, and also for the fact that she had turned Eldia into an empire, made her into his concubine, which means lady, or man, I guess, that you're not married to, but you have children with. It was the ye old English way of saying baby mom, and together Ymir and Fritz would go on to have 3 children. Those children would be Maria, Rose, and Sheena. And in a much too real bout of Stockholm Syndrome during this time period, Ymir grew to genuinely love Fritz. However, Fritz did not love Ymir. She was a slave in his mind and a tool to be used. However, Ymir's love for Fritz is why, 13 years after acquiring her Titan shifting powers, that she would throw herself in front of an assassination attempt against Fritz. However, at this moment in time, Fritz didn't believe that Ymir was dead, as Fritz had seen Ymir come back from significantly more grievous wounds. However, the reason that Ymir doesn't heal from this wound is because she chooses not to. You see, even though Ymir had grown to love Fritz as they raised their children together, as time went on, she began to realize that this wasn't love, but oppression. And as she lay there with a spear in her chest, she decided that she wanted an escape from this oppression. And so instead of healing herself from this wound that she absolutely could have healed herself from, she decided to die, to break out of a system that used her as a tool. And thus the 13-year lifespan for any Titan shifter was set. However, the only reason that Titan shifters existed in the first place is because Fritz decided that upon Ymir's death, that he would have his 3 daughters eat every ounce of her body. And as these 3 daughters consumed the spine of their mother, they themselves became Titan shifters. It was at this point that Fritz told his 3 daughters to have as many children as possible, and that upon their death to have their children eat their spines, in order to spread the blood of Ymir as far and as wide as possible to increase the reach of Eldia. However, the true irony in the situation is that even though Ymir allowed herself to die and thus was broken out of the oppression of Fritz, she, upon death, ascended to the Coordinate, becoming the founding Titan, or at least the entity that controls the powers of the founding Titan. See, the irony of her releasing herself from the oppression through death is that she was oppressed even further in death, because her role in the Coordinate was to be a permanent subordinate to the ideologies of the Fritz family, as only those who were descendants of the Fritz family would be able to control the founding Titan. And thus Ymir, even after technically being released from the shackles of oppression in her lifetime, went on to create every single Titan body and do the bidding of the Fritz family for the next 2,000 years. Ymir's abilities were eventually broken up into 9 Titan shifters. You know, the Colossal, Armored, Cart, Jaw, Attack, Beast, and all the other ones. And with the powers of these 9 Titans, the subjects of Ymir established the LDN Empire. And the Eldians used the powers of the 9 Titan shifters as weapons of mass destruction, wiping out entire countries and cultures in one fell swoop. It's estimated that during this time period of Eldia setting up its empire, that the Eldians killed more than 3 times the world's population in 1854. And considering the fact that the world population in 1854 is around 2 billion people, that means that the LDN Empire rested on a throne of 6 billion corpses, which makes sense when you consider the fact that this warmongering went on for almost 1900 years. As it pertains to Eldia and Marley though, the true warmongering between Eldia and Marley re-kicked up around 1200 years prior to the timeline of Attack on Titan. As 1200 years in the past, Eldia began its true assault on Marley, specifically 3 Marleyan cities: Lago, Monte, and Valais. These 3 attacks are known as the Fall of Lago, the Devastation of Monte, and the Ravaging of Valais. It's said that the Fall of Lago was the most violent of them all, with some survivors of Lago being able to flee out of Lago into what was referred to as the Wastes, an uninhabited territory that surrounded Lago. However, the survivors escaping the brutality of this sacking of Lago were met with Titans who were waiting for their escape in the Wastes, ensuring that every citizen of Lago was eradicated. And thus, for roughly the next 1,000 years, the Marleyans would live in servitude to the Eldians, with Eldia's only ally being the country of Hizuru, which is just Japan, because at some point or another, every anime works in just Japan. And of course, just Japan wasn't being suppressed by the Eldians. They were right there with them. However, there's something dangerous about the idea of having absolute control of the world for thousands of years. See, nothing pulls people together like an outside enemy, an idea, a concept, a face to rally against. However, the problem with having weapons of mass destruction that the rest of the world can't even begin to fight against for thousands of years, that eventually you're gonna run out of enemies. And that's exactly what happened in the LDN Empire. Eventually, Eldia ran out of enemies. They beat everyone. And when you no longer have a concept or a face or an enemy to rally against, you begin to look inwards. And slowly but surely, the LDN Empire began to war with itself. See, at this point in time, the 9 Titan shifters had been split to 9 families. Envision each of these families like a royal family living within the confines of the LDN Empire. Now, these families would sometimes squabble with each other, but the Freitz family, which still had the founding Titan, kept everything under control. So even though there was battles between the royal families, which controlled the Titan shifters, the LDN Empire, for all intents and purposes, was fine. That's until the Freitz family got a little bit less stable and a lot less authoritarian. See, when the founding Titan came into the hands, or I guess the mouth, of Karl Freitz, things changed. See, Karl Freitz was the 145th king. The LDN Empire had existed for about 1700 years. Karl Freitz believed that what the LDN Empire had done to the rest of the world could never be atoned for, and that Eldians, and more specifically Titans, shouldn't have existed in the first place. Therefore, in order to atone for what the Eldians had done to the Marleyans, Karl Freitz, as the now inheritor of the founding Titan, decided to work with the Tiber family. You see, the Tiber family were the family in control of the Warhammer Titan, and were in control of the Warhammer Titan until Eren decided to use the Jaw Titan like a nutcracker to kind of end that for them. Now, the reason that the Tiber family were still considered royalty in Marley, even though they were Eldians, is because they and Karl Freitz kind of ordained it to be so. See, Karl Freitz decided to no longer squash the internal conflicts between royal families. And without the power of the founding Titan pacifying the royal families from battling against each other, the Great Titan War began. And as all of these incredibly powerful families were battling against each other, the LDN Empire got weaker. And while the Great Titan War was going on and the LDN Empire was getting weaker by the day, the Tiber family and Karl Freitz conjured up a fake hero. They created a hero by the name of Helos, a legendary Marleyan hero who joined the Tiber family to kill the king of the Eldian Empire. Now, obviously, this didn't happen because Karl Freitz then took the rest of the Eldians to Paradise Island. This legend, who may or may not have existed, was conjured to worsen the Eldian civil war, as the idea of the Marleyans rising up and killing the Eldian king allowed the Marleyans to rally around this idea and kill the Eldian Empire, something that they would do with the help of the Tiber family and a couple of other royal Titan shifter families. And because so many of the royal Titan shifter families sided with the Marleyan Empire ended up with 7 out of the 9 Titan shifters, leaving only the founding and the attack Titan on Paradise. And upon Karl Freitz getting all of the Eldians he could to Paradise Island, he erected the walls, which we now know were created out of a series of thousands of colossal Titans, which Karl Freitz was able to create using the power of the founding Titan. Karl Freitz then changed his name to Reese and was known as the first Reese King. However, not all Eldians made it to Paradise Island. In fact, most didn't. And all Eldians who remained on the mainland were conquered, forcing them to live as second-class citizens in ghettos. While they then used their newfound influence to spread lies about the LDN Empire, claiming that the LDN Empire had resorted to eugenics over the process of 1700 years to weed out people who weren't subjects of Ymir, and going so far as to claim that Ymir Freets had gained her power from the devil of all things. And Eldians did not live a good life in Marley. Any Eldian caught doing any crime was brought to Paradise Island, turned into a pure titan, and left to wander for eternity. And because of this, Eldians tried to rally against the Marleyan government. You see, some family members of the Freets family still existed on the mainland, and they rallied revolutionaries around themselves to battle against the Marleyan government. However, this revolution wasn't strong enough to overthrow the Marleyan government, therefore all the revolutionists were executed, including Eren Kruger's family. This is important because Eren Kruger is the first attack titan we know of, and we know that attack titans can receive memories from their future inheritors. And since Eren is the last inheritor of the attack titan, he has the final say in what the attack titan sees from the future, which is why every single attack titan in history has battled for freedom. And this is why Eren Kruger passed down the attack titan to Grisha Jaeger, as Eren showed him that he needed to pass down the attack titan to Grisha Jaeger, because technically anything that's ever happened, will happen, or has happened has already happened in the Attack on Titan universe. Time isn't a line in the Attack on Titan universe. Eren technically exists forever in the timeline of Attack on Titan, but then again, so does everybody, as Eren's able to send memories to Eren Kruger before he's even the Attack Titan or alive for that matter, at least if you're looking at time linearly. However, Marley wasn't satisfied with simply crushing the LDN Empire. Marley also wanted to reclaim the Founding Titan, as they understood with the power of the Founding Titan, not only did the Paradise Island technically pose a threat, as at any point, if somebody in the royal family was able to overthrow Karl Freetz's no war vow, they could activate a rumbling and kill the entire world. On top of that, if Marley was able to reclaim the Founding Titan, since they still have royal blood family members like Zeke, they would not only be able to get rid of all Eldians, but also harness the power of the Founding Titan. And thus Marley sent Reiner, Annie, and Berthold to Paradise Island to get the Founding Titan, also known as Eren. And if Marley had had their way, they would have fed Eren to Zeke, who would have used the anatomical manipulation powers of the Founding Titan to make all subjects of Ymir infertile, guaranteeing that this generation of Eldians would be the last. And therefore, Eren decided to start the rumbling. As you can see, the history between Eldia and Marley is complicated, and there's also a lot of parallels between their history and real life history, where the history that we receive from Attack on Titan is written by the victors of the moment. While Eldia is in charge for almost 2,000 years, they undersell the amount of genocide they committed against all other nations. While the Marleyans are in charge, they make up things about the Eldians to make their reign seem worse. They create fictitious heroes like Hellos for people to rally around. But more than anything, the scars from generations of suffering on both sides stick around through their children for decades to come, with neither side willing to forgive or forget events that they never saw firsthand. The history between Eldia and Marley is an interesting one, and it's important to have a comprehensive understanding of things like this because of the subject material Attack on Titan is currently dealing with. When tasked with the moral argument of whether or not genocide is the correct option or not, having anything less than 100% of the facts makes you look like a bit of an idiot. So now you have exactly that, 100% of the facts when it comes down to Eldia and Marley's relationship. Do you believe that the Marleyans have every right to be afraid of Eldia, who supposedly killed over 6 billion people? Do you believe that Eren has a leg to stand on, trying to stop the genocide of his people at the cost of the genocide of the rest of the world? Do you believe Zeke's ideology of a peaceful euthanization of an entire group of people was the correct thing to do? All of these conversations draw serious and very direct lines, the conversations we have every single day about our own world. And once you find the true and correct answer to these questions, you'll be able to apply it to real life situations. But wrestling with these moral quandaries isn't the subject of today's video. Today, I'm just making sure you have the information to do so on your own, because there's nothing sadder in this world to me than a judgment made without 100% of the information, which is also ironically the subject of my video, Is Eren Correct? And that's it. Everything you need to know about Marley and Eldia's history. Did I miss anything? Do you want a prequel story from Attack on Titan? Tell me in the comments below. And while you're down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Call me weird, but shoehorning Annie and Armin's relationship in between clips of Eren smushing children between his toes felt a bit weird.